I wish I knew what goes on in that screwy little brain of yours. How come you think that everybody in the world is stupid except for you?
Boy, you're really talking in circles.
How much of a phony can you be?
Listen, I don't have to stay here and listen to all these hysterics.
Hello, and welcome to Solipsist. I'm Khashayar Mohammadi, aka Kramer, and today I'm going to talk to you about a masterpiece of African American cinema and its relation to the tradition of cinema verite. First of all, cinema verite is a really posh-sounding coined term, but it pretty much describes my personal favorite genre. I have my own interpretations of it that I'm going to add on top of the textbook description. Term cinema verite was coined by Edgar Morin, the director of the brilliant Chronicles of the Summer, and it's been said to be a nod to the films of Giga Vertov and his term, Kino Pravda. Kino Pravda and cinema verite both mean truth cinema or cinema of truth. What cinema verite explores and tries to achieve is not so much a naturalist approach to cinema, but perhaps to manufacture a new truth in the act of filmmaking itself. It can be considered to have a certain technical and ideological overlap with direct cinema, but while direct cinema tries hard to speak of the raw realities of the world and portray them, I feel cinema verite tries to manufacture new truths. If you're still not sure if you understand the term cinema verite, I'm gonna explain it in my own terms and tell you how I perceive the genre. So to me, cinema verite is a film that on a technical level is mostly a documentary, meaning lots of non-actors, non-scripted scenes, lots of natural environments, little use of props, and pretty much a non-existent art department. But for me, what makes cinema verite different from a documentary is the emerging super-narrative that layers on top of the original intentions of documenting. So in a way, a second narrative is constructed on top of the documentation. So for example, a great film to showcase here is Werner Herzog's Grizzly Man. See, while the actual film and the documentation is about a man's obsession with the North American grizzly and nature in general, the emerging super narrative that Werner Herzog has layered on top is about how the American society alienates the mentally feeble into extremes of humanity. I am obsessed with cinema verite and its radical possibilities of expression. The discourse that can emerge is phenomenal, and I like to claim that SymbioPsychoTaxiplasm, the film that we're going to discuss today, is the second stepping stone, chronologically speaking, in the tradition of American cinema verite. The first one being Orson Welles' F for Fake, which I hope to cover in the future. So I'm going to give a very brief introduction of the writer, director, producer, and editor of the film SymbioPsychoTaxiplasm, William Greaves. He was born in Harlem, made his acting debut in the American Negro Theater, moved on to the Actors Studio, acting along Marlon Brando and Paul Newman, and then worked as an editor for the National Film Board of Canada. So we can see that he has quite an eclectic background in filmmaking. As with most cinema verite films, SymbioPsychoTaxiplasm starts in the infra-narrative. We start in the reality, and then we're taken away from it. The film is about a repeating screen test. There are banal, horrible dialogues being spoken between a man and a woman seemingly having marital troubles.
I am a woman, Freddie. I am not a fool. And if you think I'm gonna stand around like some idiot with egg on my face while you play your friggin' games, you've got another thing coming.
Troubles. There is such inconsequential discourse on homosexuality that doesn't go anywhere, but that is not the point. It's all boring and inconsequential until the film is a concept film. Its self-proclaimed manifestos are very different from what the film ends up actually achieving. So what the film tells you is very different from what the film ends up actually doing. The film quickly turns around from the actors and on to the cast, crew, and especially the director.
What, Maria, what are you doing?
Okay.
No, this one Twitter, this one go.
Maria is, if I may use the expression,
5'6" now, yeah.
is plugging me in.
Yeah, so I see. Why didn't you people get to it?
And it becomes a story about the relationships, the interactions. Greaves says on camera that he aims to portray everything about sexuality. And let's remember, this is 1968. America's hottest topic is sexuality. But what we end up seeing doesn't really speak volumes about sexuality.
I'm a woman.
And?
I'm a woman and not a fool, Freddie.
What it does best is about the portrayal of the multifaceted collectivist nature of cinema. If you look at the actual footage, it's subpar at best. Scenes are underexposed, overexposed, they have horrible audio, there's way too much intruding on the production. So we can be sure that what we see is not what we're meant to take away from the film. Where the film really shines is when it starts talking about authorship and the collective nature of cinema. So when I was 17, I borrowed this book by Jean Renoir from the library, and in it, he was talking about how cinema is the absolute worst art form created by humanity. How there is so much at play and so little of the vision ends up peeking through. And if there is a single film that demonstrates this, it's SymbioPsychoTaxiplasm. The brilliance of the film starts where we start seeing these staff and crew meetings being filmed without the director's knowledge. And the crew are trying to criticize the vision of Greaves. So Greaves is sculpting a film out of his failure to direct.
Well, we were sitting around the other night, and in talking, a few of us, we realized that here is an open-ended film with no plot that we can see, with no end that we can see, with an action that we can't follow. We're all intelligent people. The obvious thing is to fill in the blanks, to create for each of our own selves a film that we understand. And if we try to think about the reasoning of the director for allowing us the opportunity to do this, giving us the circumstances that enable us to be able to sit here, we can only conclude, at least we did last night, that he wanted it like this.
He edits himself into the narrative as a flawed director. And this is where the verite of his cinema verite shines through. His film is an exercise in style. He retells the same story in dozens of different ways to show the impotence of authorship and the collectivist nature of cinema. The super narrative that emerges ends up being a story about a democratically directed film. SymbioPsychoTaxiplasm might be one of the only democratically directed films ever. The discourse of the cast and crew is so crucially woven into the overarching narrative of the film. Greaves might be the first anti-author, someone who dissolves the cinematic eye into the collectivist effort of cinema itself.
The director does not know that we are photographing, this scene. We're doing it on our own. And we were sitting there, and it occurred to us while we were trying to figure out what the film was about, that we should be filming this.
Yeah, like he wants us to help him
Right,
make a
because
film.
we're
That's
really
obvious.
the only people who are in a position so far to be able to comment, about the film, because the director, Bill Greaves, he is so far into, making the film that he has no perspective. And
This may be the best film by a bad director, but we have to remember that Greaves also edited this. And as you may know, a documentary is mainly directed on the editing table. So halfway through the film, it's good to ask yourself, who is this film directed by? Well, is it still directed by William Greaves? Well, yes, but with a slight reorientation. The crew are now actors, the director is now the editor, but who are the actors? We'll get to that. As someone who has worked on movie sets for years, this film looks like a nightmare to work on. I remember on film sets, nothing bugged me more than an overzealous director with an ambiguous vision that no one could comprehend. It's always first-time directors, and you have to remember that Bill Greaves is a first-time director here. The film is schizophrenic in a very literal way. So there's a schism between the core and the surface. There is a schism and divergence between the overexposed, underexposed scenes, horrible sound work, and the brilliant discourse surfacing. It is orchestrated even when it isn't. So Greaves' directing reminds me of a composer that in a fit of anger throws out all his instruments out the window. And in the clickety-clank of them crashing onto the floor, he finds a symphony. So much is orchestrated out of this chaos. And it's because of the 3 years that Greaves spent editing this film. We see the crew criticize Greaves' writing as bad writing. Everything turns existential here. These actors are trapped into the banality of their scripts, and the simplicity of their repetition brings out a rage that taps into this primal creativity.
You are really sick.
You're damn right I'm sick. I am sick of you.
You have got to believe me.
Let's cut it.
See, I mean, this is...
No.
No.
Take it easy.
Why should I take it easy? What?
It's going very well.
It is not, and you know it.
Through constant repeating of these banal lines, they have to situate themselves within the banality of their own conformist sexualities. The director is a bad actor in his own movie, but the actors are an eternal recurrence of oppressed sexualities. The democratic filmmaking in no way extends to the actors. They are there to endlessly relive this discourse until they dissolve into it. Again, what I want us to remember is that Greaves has edited this film into what it is. It could have been easily a tale of the glorification of Greaves' genius, but it isn't. He portrays himself as overzealous, esoteric, and we are not on his side all the time. The film is an experiment in style, and the more we watch, the more we understand. The pieces slowly come together by the end. We are constantly dragged between fiction, reality, and super reality. It's a film made from the frustration of a crew. And it's great how the crew themselves recognize this frustration as an emergent property of the banality of the work.
Human life isn't necessarily well written, you know.
Excuse me?
Human life isn't necessarily well written.
Well, that's the whole point.
That's the whole point. Here we're confronted with one of the ultimate banalities of life. And a pair of actors says this ultimate banality, and Bill has given them these lines to play in the first place. And then tells them how to say it. And the actors try to find the meaning in it. Now, I look at it this way. I see every American man at some time in his life saying these lines to every American woman.
In a way, Greaves' horrible writing is intentionally frustrating the cast and crew into tapping into their primal creativity. And the film has an unbelievable underlying message, which is that discontent, especially creative discontent, is perhaps the most efficient way to draw out creativity. My favorite part is where a crew member starts criticizing Greaves' unrealistic and theatrical language in his dialogue. And here Greaves clearly mentions that this banality is a tool to bring out the collective creativity.
Is this, that the screen test proves to be unsatisfactory from the standpoint of the actors and the director. And then what happens is that the director and the actors undertake to improvise something better than that which has been written, you know, in the screen test.
The film's ending is brilliant. A homeless, seemingly queer painter barges in on the cast and crew. He's drunk, he's spewing organic, free-range philosophy that is way more eloquent and poetic than any written scene in the entire film.
Yeah, but why do we have to have adaptation of words and symbols? Can we be ourselves? You want to go get fucked, that's all. That's the way I think. You want to suck, suck, goddammit. Everybody suck. What? Didn't you suck your mama's nipples first?
He shits on the ideology of the crew members that life is not well written. The best written part of the film is its most unscripted, and the inclusion of it is very interesting. It's very different than when other films do similar things. I believe Greaves included this scene and back-wrote everything based on this man's soliloquy. From the impotence of theatrical language to the discourse around the lack of cinematic reality, this is all negated within the last few minutes where this drunk man is just naturally spewing his mind. Overall, SymbioPsychoTaxiplasm has stood the test of time, and not only is it a giant stepping stone in African American cinema, it's a monument to cinema itself and cinema verite. I highly recommend watching it on the Criterion Channel. Criterion Channel has lifted the paywall for a whole bunch of black cinema. There is Julie Dash's Daughters of the Darst, Maya Angelou's Down in the Delta, Maddie Diop's short films, Khalek Allah's films. I highly suggest you go watch, support black filmmakers, celebrate and champion the culture. I hope to get into cinema verite more in the future, especially its influence on the Iranian New Wave. But for now, bye.